Unlike English, Korean doesn't rely on strict word order to show who is doing what in a sentence. Speakers can move words around for emphasis or clarity. This is a feature called scrambling. In this presentation, we'll look at what scrambling is, how it works in Korean syntax, and why these movements still result in sentences that make complete sense. Korean is known for allowing flexible word order, but this flexibility is not random. Scrambling refers to moving elements like the object or adverbs to positions earlier in the sentence while keeping the same overall meaning. Listeners can still understand the sentence because Korean uses case markers that identify grammatical roles. So scrambling is best understood as a systematic type of word order variation used for emphasis or organization of information. Because Korean nouns carry nominative or accusative case markers, the grammar does not rely on strict word order to determine who is the subject and who is the object. Even when the object moves to the front of the sentence, the case marking preserves the intended structure of the sentence. This allows Korean speakers to shift elements depending on the context, what is known information, or what they want to highlight in the sentence. There are several different types of scrambling in Korean. Movement can occur within a single clause or across multiple clauses, and it may involve core arguments or optional elements like time or manner expressions. These different structures help us understand whether scrambling is motivated more by syntax or by discourse, depending on how far the phrase moves and what role it plays in the sentence. Scrambling does not change who is doing what in the sentence, but it does change which element stands out in the discourse. For instance, moving the object to the front can make it the topic of the sentence or show contrast with other information. So scrambling is important for packaging information effectively in conversation or storytelling. This slide introduces the key structural components needed to understand scrambling. CP is the top layer where complementizers appear and where discourse roles like topic and focus are represented. Scrambled phrases usually land in spec CP, which is why they carry emphasis. TP is the layer below CP, containing tense and the canonical subject position spec TP. Even if the subject moves, the grammar interprets it as originating here. VP is the core of the sentence, containing the verb and its object or adjuncts. Scrambling starts from this base position. NP refers to the nouns with case markers like nominative and accusative. Case marking allows Korean word order to change without losing grammatical roles. Matrix CP or matrix TP refer to the main clause layers. In long-distance scrambling, movement proceeds upward through each CP layer to reach the matrix CP. Traces mark the original VP position of a moved phrase, maintaining correct interpretation for scope and binding. Finally, Korean scrambling behaves like A-prime movement, which is movement motivated by information structure, similar to focus or question movement in other languages. Together, these structural positions explain how scrambled sentences are formed and interpreted in Korean grammar. This first syntax tree shows the basic SOV word order of Korean. The important takeaway is that this is the structure form from which all scrambled sentences deviate. Here in spec TP we have the subject, Suniga. Inside we have the VP. We have the object and the verb, 사과를 and 먹었다. No scrambling takes place here. Everything appears in its base generated position. This tree is our starting point because it helps us see what the structure looks like before any movement happens. Once we examine the scrambled trees, we'll be able to see which phrases moved, where they moved from, and how the trace is left behind in the VP. This baseline SOV structure is essential for understanding how Korean maintains meaning under word order variation. This is the simplest example of short-distance scrambling in Korean. Here the object has moved out of VP into spec CP. The CP position is typically associated with topic or focus, which means the speaker is highlighting the apple for contextual reasons. In the VP, you'll notice a trace, where the object originally appeared. This trace is extremely important. It shows that the movement is syntactic, It preserves interpretation. It allows binding and scope to be computed from the original position. This movement does not change the event meaning. Sune is still the one doing the eating, but it changes the sentence's informational meaning. Instead of answering, "What did Suni do?" this version answers, "What did Suni eat?" This slide shows a simple quantifier structure without scrambling. The subject, each student, stays inside TP, and the object, the books, remains inside VP. Because the word order is canonical, the sentence's scope interpretation is ambiguous. It can mean either that each student read possibly different books or that each student read the same book, depending on context. The important thing here is that the structure itself doesn't force a specific interpretation. The syntax is neutral, so scope is left open. In this slide, the object moves to spec CP, and you again see a trace left inside VP. This movement has a direct effect on scope. Now the object gains wide scope, which means the sentence strongly suggests that there is one specific book that each student read. Korean allows this because moving the object to the front makes it the most prominent element in the clause, raising its interpretive scope. This tree shows how scrambling affects not only structure and focus, but also deeper aspects of interpretation, like quantifier scope. This slide shows a reflexive in a canonical unscrambled sentence. The subject, 형이가, binds the reflexive, 자기를, which appears in the VP. Binding relations are fully respected here because the subject C commands the reflexive in its base position. This provides an important baseline before we examine reflexive scrambling on the next slide. This is one of the more interesting cases of scrambling. The reflexive moves to spec CP, just like objects in OSV scrambling. Despite this movement, binding is still maintained. The subject still binds the reflexive correctly because Korean allows scrambling that does not break C command in interpretation. This is often used as evidence that Korean scrambling is a prime movement. It changes the word order but preserves core binding relationships. This is the most complex slide and one of the most theoretically important. Here, the object is originally part of the embedded clause, 순이가 먹었다고. Instead of staying inside that clause, it moves all the way to the front of the main clause, matrix spec CP. The trace, deep inside the embedded VP, shows where it came from. This type of movement is called long-distance scrambling, and it illustrates that Korean allows movement across clause boundaries. This movement is associated with topic marking or contrast rather than scope or argument structure. It also shows that Korean scrambling proceeds cyclically, passing first through the embedded CP before moving to the higher CP, following standard movement theory predictions. Korean speakers initially experience a temporary processing cost when something is scrambled, because the listener cannot assign grammatical roles until case markers appear. Once they do, comprehension becomes very fast and natural, showing that case, not word order, drives interpretation in Korean. For learners of Korean, scrambling is more difficult because they rely on strict word order from languages like English. Only advanced learners consistently use case cues. Korean children also show that scrambling depends on case knowledge. They begin with simple SOV word order and only start scrambling after they reliably produce subject and object markings. By early school age, children sound much like adults in their use of scrambling to mark topics in contrast. This confirms that scrambling reflects both grammatical and discourse development. Korean scrambling is not just stylistic variation. It is a key feature of Korean grammar. Because case particles mark grammatical roles, the language preserves meaning even when phrases move. Short scrambling affects interpretation, such as scope and binding, which shows that it involves real syntactic A-prime movement, complete with traces left in the VP. Meanwhile, long-distance scrambling does not change truth conditions and instead highlights discourse roles like topic. These results support a hybrid theory that incorporates both syntax and information structure, giving us a complete explanation of the behavior of scrambling. On the practical side, understanding scrambling helps language learners interpret conversational Korean more accurately, especially when speakers highlight or contrast information. And on the theoretical side, Korean provides compelling evidence for how languages use the CP domain to structure discourse. Studying scrambling ultimately reveals how Korean grammar tightly integrates sentence structure, meaning, and real world communication. These are more references that you can use to understand more about Korean scrambling. I also use these in the making of this presentation. Thank you for listening.